There's a fan theory on Reddit in which future Trunks apparently killed Android 17, as we all know, and took his scarf as a trophy. To start things off, let's talk about what Dragon Ball fans would obviously notice first, because Dragon Ball fans seem to have an obsession with color. But the funny thing about this, it's like Dragon Ball Super doesn't seem to really care about color because they just made Trunks' hair blue out of absolutely nowhere. And this is rather hilarious considering the fact that the present version of Trunks is the exact same person but has a different hair color. So how does this truly make any sense, especially if we're looking at the anime version, because they're the same person but they have two different hair colors even though they're the same exact person? Doesn't make any sense. But the point that most Dragon Ball fans would point out first is that Trunks' scarf in Super is red and 17's scarf is orange, and I think that's the weakest argument to use for this, but if you want to use that weak argument to start things off, then by all means go for it. But we also have to remember the second point about this. In the anime adaptation, Trunks just completely obliterated 17 with his blast and didn't go down there to pick it up. And he just basically just left the battlefield, because if you look at the anime adaptation, Trunks was shown later on with the old man. And it would be very unlikely to believe that Trunks would go back to the battle scene to just pick up 17's dead scarf when it's perceived that his entire body was completely obliterated, and if he did have a leftover scarf, it's unlikely that it would be completely intact if it's that exact same scarf. So, looking at the battlefield itself, it just doesn't make any logical sense to believe that Trunks would have been able to have gotten it, especially because he was with the old man afterwards. And in the manga adaptation, there was never the scene with the old man because Android 17 actually killed the old man, because the manga was rather dark in that scene where after the old man shot 17 in the face, 17 basically comes up to him and basically puts a gun to his face and shoots him right before Trunks arrives. So in one version, Trunks is holding the old man after he saves them after the android battle, and in another situation, the old man's completely dead, and we don't even see what Trunks does after this. Now, there's another reason why this theory doesn't quite make a lot of sense, and it's really the time that passes. Because Trunks was seen numerous times after the battle with 17, and there was no scarf to be found. So, for example, we see him afterwards fighting Cell, where he was in his Saiyan battle armor uniforms. And if we go back to Dragon Ball Super, in both the anime and the manga, starting off with the anime, we actually see that there was like a Buu Saga equivalent many years later for Trunks in the Zamasu arc where we saw the flashback. And in this sequence, we don't see Trunks with this scarf. And it's been quite a lot of time that has passed. And even if we look at the manga adaptation, you could also see here that Trunks also didn't have the scarf back at this point too. So if he did decide to use the scarf, it would be so many years later, and it would just make very little sense that he would have had time to get it on the battlefield, in addition to all of a sudden just decide to wear the scarf at this particular point in his life. It just would seem like something weird to do that far into the future, because if he really wanted to do this symbolically, he would have done it much earlier. But I will admit, though, for future Trunks specifically, that it's rather in character for him to do something like this, because kind of similar to what we saw with Bardock in the TV special, the anime-only TV special, Bardock the Father of Goku, after all of his Saiyan comrades were basically killed, we saw something similar where like Bardock basically uses a headband that's filled with a lot of blood and wraps it around his head, and it's completely red and you wouldn't even know that it was originally supposed to be white. Considering that, it's kind of similar to what this situation would be, where Trunks would do it kind of like a symbolic thing to represent him wearing, his enemy's garments to represent that he finally conquered them, and that, now the time has changed. So ultimately, this is a theory that doesn't make any sense at all, but we must admit, though, that it is a fun fan theory to discuss, even if it's not 100% realistic. But in all likelihood, Trunks just basically decided to start using a scarf, and the real answer to this is that the designers of Trunks at the point of Dragon Ball Super basically just said, hey, let's give Trunks a scarf for this arc, and they probably totally even forgot that 17 back in that time period even wore Scarf, and probably didn't even think that it would ever be connected to Trunks in the first place. So we can say with absolute confidence that this theory is debunked.